Hello, friends. Today marks the 1000th day of the war in Ukraine. The Russians continue to advance in Chasiv Yar, reports the Ukrainian military telegram channel, Deep State. Over the past 24 hours they have advanced both in the city itself and on its northern flank. Bild newspaper military observer Julian Rurp says that the Russians have almost reached the stadium in the city center. Russian troops have been spotted in the center of Chasiv Yar for the first time. And if we look at the area around, it does not look like there are Ukrainian soldiers ready for battle everywhere. We see complete ruins and the use of drones by the Ukrainians to attack the Russians. This always indicates that the Russians already control this territory, and the Ukrainians are attacking them with drones from about 100 meters to the west, the journalist said. Also, according to Ukrainian military observer Mitikov, on the southern flank, the bridgehead of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Klishchiivka area is close to falling. It looks like the bridgehead is living out its last days. Holding on for 1.5 years to something that has long been destroyed is a superhuman effort. In the context of the operation in Chasiv Yar, this is, of course, very bad. And this worsens our positions in the direction of Konstantinivka. Because after the liquidation of the Klishchiivka bridgehead, Chasiv Yar will not be able to hold out for long. Especially since our subsidence has begun again there, Miroshnikov wrote. At the same time, maps of Russian telegram channels indicate that almost the entire territory in the area of Klishchiivka and Andriivka, to the east of the Siversky Donetsk-Donbas channel, is already occupied by the Russian army. The Russians are less than 5 kilometers away from encircling the Ukrainian armed forces south of Kurakovy, according to the Deep State map. In a week, Russia has reduced this distance by almost a kilometer, and the gray zone in the pocket is gradually increasing. Meanwhile, the threat of a Russian offensive on Kurakovy from the north is increasing, says Bild military observer Julian Rurp. According to his assessment, north of the reservoir, the Russians captured the village of Ilinka and approached the village of Barestki, and also occupied the approaches to the automobile and railway crossings towards Kurakovy. This gives them the opportunity to shell Kurakovy from the north from only 1 to 1.5 kilometers. According to a Ukrainian soldier with the call sign Muchnoi, Barestki is already almost completely under Russian control. A lieutenant of the Ukrainian armed forces with the call sign Alex reported in the evening that the fighting in Kurakovy has already reached the central areas of the city. According to him, some of the Russians are being pushed back, but they are starting repeated attacks and have already captured the grain elevator. Also, the fighter Muchnoi writes that a dangerous situation is developing in the direction of Velika Novosilka, where the Russians are breaking through to the highway leading to the city from the north, through the village of Rozdolny. They have more than 1.5 kilometers left to the village, and a little more than 3 to the highway. The military believes that Russian troops are also planning to reach the village of Bahadar on the highway to Kurakovy in order to completely encircle the Kurakovy garrison. Today, Russia officially announced that Ukraine had struck its territory with long-range American missiles. The Russian Defense Ministry reported that 6 ATACMS ballistic missiles were launched at night at the Bryansk region. 5 of them were allegedly shot down, another was damaged and fell on the technical territory of a military facility, causing a fire. There was no destruction, as stated. Ukraine announced this morning that it had struck a military warehouse in Karashev, Bryansk region, but did not specify what exactly. The General Staff did not officially confirm the use of ATACMS, but Ukrainian media wrote even before the Russian statements that the warehouse was hit with these missiles. Zelensky also did not confirm the strike, although he did not deny it. Sorry, no unnecessary details. Ukraine has long-range capabilities. It has long-range drones of its own production. We now have a long Neptune, and more than one. And now we have ATACMS, and we will use all of this, Zelensky said, answering a relevant question. At the same time, he confirmed that Ukraine received permission for long-range strikes. Now that there are relevant decisions, and not only in the media, but also in the relevant countries, it is very important to add to these decisions the number of opportunities with which we can reduce Russia's military potential, wherever it is, Zelensky said. Thus, if the reports of the ATATMS strike are indeed real, then the first strike was carried out after media reports about Biden's permission to lift the ban on long-range strikes. At the same time, the strike on the Bryansk region makes adjustments to the previously published data. Thus, Western media claimed that the zone of long-range strikes on Russia would be limited to the Kursk region or even the Ukrainian bridgehead in this region. But, as we can see, the strike, which Russia has already confirmed, was carried out very far from the combat zone near Kursk in the Bryansk region. The question arises, why did Russia so quickly officially announce the ATATMS strike? After all, the Russian Ministry of Defense usually does not comment on strikes on its facilities. Perhaps the statement followed as part of Moscow's already prepared reaction to the expected strike, which it is possible will be followed by some actions. And one of them has already followed this morning. Putin issued a decree approving changes to the Russian nuclear doctrine. Here are the main changes to the doctrine that are coming into force. Aggression against Russia and its allies by a non-nuclear country with the support of a nuclear state will be considered a joint attack. Russia can use nuclear weapons in case of a critical threat to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of itself and Belarus. The conditions for the use of nuclear weapons include the launch of ballistic missiles against Russia. Let me clarify that ATATMS are exactly such missiles. A nuclear response from Russia is possible in the event of a critical threat to its sovereignty, even with conventional weapons, with a massive launch of military aircraft, cruise missiles, drones, other aircraft, and their crossing of the Russian border. Providing territory and resources for aggression against Russia is also a basis for nuclear deterrence. The key change is in the first paragraph. It is obviously written specifically for the war in Ukraine and is intended to justify the possibility of Russia using nuclear weapons both against Ukraine and against countries that are helping Kiev in the war. That is, against the United States and its NATO allies. Earlier, representatives of the Russian government at various levels sent signals that Moscow could use nuclear weapons in the event of strikes by Western long-range missiles on its territory. In particular, yesterday, State Duma Speaker Volodin made this clear. Putin previously stated that such strikes would mean the direct participation of Western countries in the war against Russia. And today, Kremlin Speaker Peskov said this. The use of Western non-nuclear missiles against Russia by Ukraine under the new doctrine could lead to a nuclear response, Peskov said. The key point is not only that such a possibility is spelled out in the nuclear doctrine, but also that it was said by the official Kremlin spokesman Peskov, and not by the on-duty messenger of the apocalypse Medvedev or some Russian deputy or politician. In essence, the Kremlin, through Peskov, for the first time since the beginning of the war, has stated the possibility of using nuclear weapons in it, and named a specific reason for this: strikes with long-range missiles. Perhaps this is the first time that the Kremlin has directly acknowledged the potential use of nuclear weapons in response to strikes on Russian territory using long-range missiles. Simply put, Peskov openly admits that the Kremlin is now considering the possibility of a nuclear strike, says Tatiana Stanovaya, a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for Russia and Eurasia. The current situation is causing Putin a significant temptation to escalate. Since Trump has not yet taken office, such a move would not prevent any immediate peace initiatives and could strengthen Trump's argument for direct dialogue with Putin. At the same time, it would expose Biden to criticism for being a catalyst for escalation and potentially prevent Ukraine from using long-range missiles further, Stanovaya writes. In her opinion, Putin may view the current situation as a strategic in-between moment. By suggesting possible peace initiatives from Trump, While highlighting what he sees as the irresponsibility of Biden's policies, Putin may try to present the West with two stark choices. Do you want a nuclear war? You'll get it. Or let's end this war on Russia's terms. This marks a very dangerous moment, the analyst writes. In the information field of Ukraine, an extremely frivolous attitude towards the possibility of a nuclear strike by the enemy is widespread. One can often come across the point of view that a nuclear strike on Ukraine will not affect the course of the war in any way, but will send Russia into international isolation and ultimately force Moscow to capitulate. However, in reality, a nuclear strike is one of the most terrible scenarios for Ukraine. No one can guarantee that the reaction of the world community will be really tough. True, unconfirmed information appeared in the media that the United States threatened Moscow with the destruction of the fleet in the event of a nuclear strike on Ukraine. However, this, like any other option for a military response from the West, would mean NATO entering a war with Russia and would most likely lead to Russia using nuclear weapons, since Russia will not be able to resist the alliance with conventional weapons. Whether NATO will take such a risk because of Ukraine is an open question. China and other countries of the global South have repeatedly spoken out against the use of nuclear weapons. But what their reaction will be if the Kremlin uses them is not exactly known. Will they sever relations with Russia, which will cause its economy to collapse? Or will they be afraid to drive Putin into a corner so as not to receive a nuclear strike themselves? There is no clear answer to all these questions. And if there is no serious response from the world community after the first nuclear strike, then Ukraine will face a fork in the road with only two options. The first is to stop resisting and capitulate. Moreover, in this case we will no longer be talking about agreeing to lose part of the territory and stopping the war along the front line, according to the Korean scenario. By the way, in Ukraine, the Korean scenario is often called capitulation, although it is not capitulation, since the country retains sovereignty, an army, and control over most of the territory. We are talking about capitulation in the literal sense of the word, with the occupation of the entire country by the Russian army, the dissolution of the armed forces of Ukraine, the appointment by Moscow of new leaders of Ukraine, and so on. This was the case with Japan in 1945, after the nuclear strikes on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The second option, in case of refusal to capitulate, new series of nuclear strikes on Ukraine may follow. If the Kremlin does not receive a tough response from the international community after the first strike, then it is unlikely that anything will stop it from launching new strikes, which will sooner or later deprive Ukraine of the opportunity to continue its resistance. If the world's reaction is really tough and puts Russia on the brink of defeat, then this could lead to a global nuclear war. All these scenarios are so terrible that I want to say only one thing about them. This cannot happen, because it can never happen. However, after Russia's invasion in 2022, which few believed in either, this formula no longer works. It showed that, unfortunately, even the most terrible options are real. Moreover, both in Ukraine and in the West and in Russia, the positions of the war party are very strong. In Kiev and Washington, it declares that there is no need to be afraid to raise the stakes, since Russia will not dare to use nuclear weapons and will eventually retreat. In Moscow, she argues that there is no need to be afraid of using nuclear weapons or issuing an ultimatum threatening to use them, because the West will not dare to respond harshly and will eventually back down. But in the end, the calculations of the war parties on both sides of the front line may turn out to be wrong, and the situation will get out of control. The only way to guarantee that the worst outcome will not happen is to stop the war in Ukraine as soon as possible. Friends, this channel exists solely thanks to your support. If you have the opportunity and desire to support the channel, I will be very grateful to you. Thank you very much and see you in the next video.